And again, the young guy found himself here, and his very stay made him feel so sad. Once again, an island drowning in smoke appeared before his eyes. The ruins of Western-style buildings seemed to be flying around, indicating that the place was deserted. But suddenly, while the place was covered in deathly silence, in the distance the guy saw two bright lights that looked like someone's evil eyes. At that moment, the smoke began to clear, and an unknown silhouette became clearly visible in the distance. Taking a closer look, the boy saw a large, strong man with a bare torso who, looking straight into the boy's eyes, asked him to come closer. And without waiting for the guy to approach, the man seemed to fly up to him and very clearly stated that he would wait for him on the edge of hell. These words seemed to send shivers down the boy's body, who couldn't believe that this could happen. And before he could understand anything, the young man suddenly woke up in his bed. Having come to his senses, the guy finally realized that it was this strange dream again. "Sora, we're late!" They shouted from the other room, and the young man, turning over, shouted that he was already coming, although in fact he didn't want to get up at all. He kept thinking about the dream and the man he seemed to know. But the question remained about what kind of hell the stranger was talking about. While doing his morning routine and looking at himself in the mirror, the guy wondered if he had overdone it with his studies, that he was having such unusual dreams. The young man was so carried away by his thoughts that he didn't even notice his father coming out of the shower. "Hey, Sora, did you oversleep today?" the man asked cheerfully, patting his son on the head. But the boy didn't like it, because he no longer considered himself a child at 15 years old. Sora's father didn't even take the boy's words into account and simply laughed, suggesting that he take a look at his muscles. But the boy continued doing his morning routine, and without looking at the man said that if they weren't huddled in a tiny apartment, he wouldn't have to see his naked father every day, to which the man promised that as soon as he gets rich, he'll buy a big house. The man even reminded that then the guy and Ricky would have their own rooms, but Sora had been hearing about this for 5 years already and didn't really believe that it would ever happen. As he washed his face, the boy thought about how much easier life had become once Ricky had joined the army. But his brother had been there for 3 years already. Sora himself also planned to join the army. But then the guy would have to say goodbye to the wildlife he had every day. The young man would not be able to bear seeing his slightly unreliable father, who jokes a lot. And I also had to say goodbye to my strict but very loving mother. Still, Sora was happy to live with such a family, wishing that these days would never end. However, the guy always knew that peaceful life would end sooner or later. And then, on one of the calmest days, the earth began to shake, and something happened that Sora did not expect at all. In the middle of the city, out of nowhere, a huge tower rose up. It was just a shock for the guy, because it's not often that you see such unusual things. At that time, Sora had no idea how much the appearance of this tower would change the course of human history. Military fighters immediately appeared in the sky, heading towards the tower. But the guy understood one thing very clearly. The tower was definitely connected somehow with his disturbing dreams. As soon as the tower appeared, the boy's brother immediately called his family and said that everything was fine and that he just needed to follow the orders of the self-defense forces, and then he would be able to return home. Ricky promised his parents and brother that he would definitely return home, but it was clearly audible that his voice was weak. After that evening, they lost contact with him, which left the whole family in despair and not knowing what to do next. The news said that people were not in danger and should stay at home. But this lasted until the news first became more and more alarming, where they said that there were already 20 towers, and then the broadcasting stopped altogether. The same information began to be transmitted on the radio. And then the order came to evacuate and people in the country began to flee. Father immediately began to get ready, and Mother left a letter on the bed for her brother, saying that they had gone to shelter. And the family headed to a safe place, packing only the bare necessities into large backpacks. Sora kept looking around as he walked, and everything he saw seemed to hint at something. A lot of military equipment passed by him, and looking inside, Sora saw how hopelessness was written on the faces of the soldiers passing by. Their cars were marked with horrible claw marks, and from inside came a nauseating smell of decay. The boy's father also saw everything that was happening and wondered what was going on, worrying about his eldest son who was never able to return home. A gym located near the family's home became a temporary evacuation shelter. The shelter was full of refugees who had pitched their tents and sleeping mats right on the floor. But Sora noticed that in such a large room it was quite quiet. People did not say anything, and it was as if everyone was waiting for their death. But even in such silence, there were troublemakers. They tried in every possible way to make their presence known. One of them was a tall, daring guy who stole bread even from the little ones. Seeing a little boy sitting on the floor about to open a package of food, the guy grabbed him by the hand, shouting that the boy was stealing his bread. To divert suspicion from himself, the guy shouted that everyone got a loaf, and the boy had supposedly already eaten his. Seeing that they didn't want to give him food, the guy hit the boy in the stomach with all his might, causing the pack of bread to fall to the floor. The people sitting nearby noticed this situation, but no one intervened and simply gasped. Everyone immediately turned away. This was only to the boy's advantage. And, glad that he was in a winning situation, he grabbed the boy's hand even more tightly and began to tug at it. Leaning towards the frightened boy, the guy slyly asked if he would mind if he took the bread, and the boy had no choice but to agree, just so that they would leave him alone. Realizing that the bread was now his, the ill-wisher laughed slyly, looking at the defenseless child. And before leaving, the guy mockingly told the boy not to whine because it wouldn't last long anyway. But suddenly, Sora's father appeared behind him and very confidently and menacingly asked why they were doing this, since they were all not in the best situation. The guy didn't even blink an eye and, turning to the man, told him to worry about himself, calling him an old man. The boy's father could not stand this attitude and raised his tone, shouting at the impudent man to return the bread. The guy was clearly not afraid of anything and did not even listen to the man, but simply swung his arm to hit him. Sora's father reacted quickly, stopping the blow coming towards him and giving the bully a final, harder hit. The guy immediately fell to the floor, and from the force of the blow to his face, he couldn't even get up. The man, having made sure that he had dealt with the offender, was finally able to return the bread to the defenseless boy. And finally, Sora's father looked menacingly at the boy, who continued to lie on the floor. The impudent fellow, not wanting to be hit again, simply kept silent. Not wanting to deal with this, the guy slowly stood up and, spitting at the man's feet, walked away. Sora quickly ran up to his father, expressing his excitement. The man, noticing his son's agitation, immediately calmed him down, saying that he would keep an eye on the impudent boy so that he would not bother anyone else. But Sora, seeing who exactly was bullying the boy, realized that he would never forget this guy even after death. It was Eiji Kagawa who made Sora unable to even move. This bastard who took pleasure in torturing the guy in the most cruel ways. And from then on, his life turned into horror, and being at school became simply unbearable. Sora didn't have time to indulge in his memories before a soldier suddenly ran into the shelter building, declaring an urgent notification. The soldier shouted anxiously that everyone should immediately leave the evacuation shelter through the back door and get into one of the trucks, and began directing everyone towards the exit. But the residents stood there questioningly and began to ask why they needed to leave. But the man in uniform said that this was confidential information and he could not say the reason. A man who looked like an important person came out from among the crowd and began to show his displeasure. The man in the suit started shouting that they were first kept locked up in their homes for 2 days and then evacuated here. But he couldn't say anything, and shouting to the soldier why he pays taxes then, he threw his bag on the floor, frightening everyone around. Suddenly, everyone heard strange sounds coming from outside. Now the soldier began to shout in panic, ordering everyone to run, saying that they were already here. Sora immediately asked his mom and dad to go right away, afraid that something terrible might happen. And looking at the place where the sounds were coming from, the guy definitely had a bad feeling. Hearing the noise, the soldier quickly ran up and began to hold the doors, shouting that he would try to hold them back while the others got into the truck. But the door could not be held for long. It was quickly knocked down and creatures similar to people, but with horns, appeared from there. The first to run into the room was a creature with huge fangs, menacing eyes and a scar across half its face, which clearly wanted to kill everyone. Sora looked at the attackers and only froze, not understanding what the hell was going on here. People scattered with screams just to avoid falling into the hands of the monsters. Sora's parents ran ahead and tried in every way to shout at their son to run faster. Meanwhile, the frightened people ran as fast as they could and climbed into the trucks that were already ready to leave. Sora couldn't make it in time, and seeing that there was little space left in the trucks, he shouted to his parents to get into the car first. Having made sure that his parents had climbed in, the boy began to climb in himself. Seeing that it was difficult for him to climb up, the boy's father quickly extended his hand to him and began to help. But the people who were already inside, out of fear that the monsters would catch up with them, started shouting that there were no more seats and that the guy should get lost. Sora realized that there was no point in fighting over a place in the car and that he needed to come up with something. Removing his hand, the boy ran to another truck, shouting to his mother and father so that they wouldn't lose him. There were no seats in the car next to mine either, and everyone was rushing to close the doors. Then the guy decided to just run until he saw a free truck, and after a couple of seconds, Sora was finally able to climb inside, thinking that the danger had passed. The people were in such a hurry that they even pushed others in front of them, which is why Sora couldn't climb up right away. But suddenly a helping hand appeared before his eyes, The happy guy immediately began to thank for the help and quickly climbed into the truck. But the guy's smile immediately disappeared when he saw who exactly helped him. Sora couldn't even move from fear, realizing that he would not be safe anywhere. Before his eyes stood Eiji Kagawa, who was smiling a big sly smile and looking at the boy with greedy eyes. Eiji, still holding the boy's hand, shouted for him to die instead of his father and pushed him out of the truck. Sora thought that this was the end and fell to the ground and couldn't even get up because of the people running too fast. Everyone ran past him, and no one even wanted to help the defenseless guy. Still lying on the ground, Sora grabbed his head to protect himself from an accidental blow and began to think that it was too early for him to die. Hoping that someone would help him, the young man closed his eyes, unable even to rise. And opening one eye, Sora saw in the middle of the crowd someone's legs, which looked more like the legs of a ghost. Raising his head, the guy saw the same man who came to him in his dream. But this time the stranger was like a ghost, and the people running past him did not notice him. The man stared at the lying guy and seemed to say in his head that he would be waiting for him on the edge of hell. Suddenly, everything around changed. Fully opening his eyes, Sora, continuing to press himself to the ground, realized that the asphalt had suddenly changed to dusty sand, and the screams of people died down. The guy began to think that this was a dream, and, afraid to get to his feet, he began to look around. While Sora was trying to figure out what was going on, he heard something flying towards him out of the corner of his ear. And when he looked, he saw a large stone hammer tied with a rope. A large axe struck right next to the guy's face, quickly stunning him. Turning around, Sora saw a green goblin who clearly wanted to kill the boy. The boy immediately started running, not understanding where his mother and father were and why he was here alone. The goblin, deciding not to run after the guy, simply threw his stone axe after him. The weapon flew just inches from Sora, leaving him with a small cut. The hammer hit the ground with all its force and lost a small piece of stone. Having picked up the weapon, the goblin continued to run after the guy, who kept wondering why the monster was running after him. The goblin continued to speed up, giving off a ferocious smile. Sora, seeing that the monster had abandoned its hammer and was continuing to move towards him, was left wondering what was going on. The guy's life began to change in a matter of seconds when a huge tower appeared in the city, emerging from nowhere. Then that bastard showed up and threw the young man out of the truck. And then there was this strange old man who first appeared in a dream, and then in real life. And now a fierce goblin is running after him, wanting to kill him for some reason. Sora, realizing that he wouldn't be able to run for long, decided to act differently. Grabbing a shard of the hammer, the guy turned around sharply and pounced on the monster, starting to mercilessly beat the goblin in all places on his body. Eventually, Sora cut down his killer and simply sat down in front of the lifeless body, realizing that he had survived and committed his first kill. After examining the stranger, the young man noticed that he looked like a character from the game and also saw the number on his chest. But what started to happen next made the guy crawl back in great fear. An unknown black object, similar to a crystal, began to crawl out of the open wound on the goblin's chest. The guy's face showed wild surprise at what he saw. The goblin's wound began to turn blue as a strange object flew out of it, rising into the air. The black crystal rose higher and higher until it was level with Sora's face, and unexpectedly for him, the object flew with great force straight into his chest, causing Sora to even curl up in place. An unknown object entered it, but left no traces. And then the wounds on the guy's body began to heal on their own, confusing him even more. Sora began to feel much stronger, and having pulled the hammer out of the dead goblin, the guy concluded that for defeating enemies, his level increases, just like in the game. Leaving the corpse on the ground, Sora walked on, thinking that there were definitely others on this tiny island, so he should look around to avoid being attacked again. Having set off on his journey, the guy saw only desert and abandoned ruins of houses. Sora went all the way around, but there were still no monsters or other roads. But suddenly, the guy came across a strange road leading through the ruined arch of an old stone building. There was only one exit from this arch, from which an unsafe staircase led downwards. Approaching the very edge of the island, Sora carefully glanced at the stairs, the steps of which seemed to float in the air. The steps were not attached to anything and remained levitating in the air, encircling the island drowning in clouds. This design looked very dubious and suspicious to the guy, but realizing that there was no other way out, Sora began to carefully take steps, holding the hammer tightly in his hand, expecting some kind of trick. In the games, such an area is the territory of the main monster, and the guy could simply respawn if he fell. There was no time to check whether this world was like a game or not, and the guy still decided to be careful. As Sora thought, the stairs eventually ended near an unknown entrance to a stone building. Showing the same caution, the guy looked inside, expecting danger every time. Moving further down the tunnel, Sora headed towards the light at the very end. Entering another room, the young man saw a large torch burning with a bright fire. The torch stood on a pedestal on which stood the slab, and behind which were large closed gates. On the slab itself, and as he came closer, Sora saw letters that he had never seen before, but the letters formed words that the boy's brain somehow understood. The words said that the fragments belonged to their bearers, and by collecting everything, one could gain the right to leave the abyss. It became clear that Sora had fallen into the abyss and needed to collect all the fragments to get out of it. Now the guy was motivated, knowing that there was a way out of here. If you think about it, that monster wasn't that strong and the young man had every chance of getting out of here alive. And full of confidence, the guy opened the doors leading into the unknown. It was unknown how much strength would be needed to pass through all the islands, but Sora was ready for anything after today. The first tier of the poor was a territory with an area of 900 square meters, and the number that was engraved on the body of that monster was the Roman one. The second tier occupied 1,800 square meters, and the monster had the number 2 on it. The third one was 3,600, and on one of the monsters the number 3 was visible. The fragments were only in the bodies of monsters with numbers. They were the key to passing to the next level, and the higher the number, the stronger the monster. But what worried the boy most was that these keys were becoming more and more difficult to find. The area of the tiers doubled each time, as did the number of monsters around. Sora had already gotten tired by this time, but he continued to move in order to get out, in the hope that he would be able to return to his city and see his parents. However, his strength was quickly restored. Since the stronger the monster was, the stronger he became. As we moved through the tiers, we encountered increasingly more diverse monsters. Meanwhile, the unknown man who came to the guy in his dream was waiting for him on a high mountain. On the 12th floor, Sora encountered the monsters that attacked the shelter that day. But now they were no match for him, and the guy dealt with the evil spirits quite quickly. During the time he spent in this world, Sora's hair began to grow, gradually changing color to white, and the number of monsters became so great that his senses began to dull. Their numbers began to grow to over 1 million. And when Sora reached the 30th level, the number of monsters reached 500 million. Finding a key has become like finding a needle in a haystack. Some of the key-carrying monsters were guarded by groups of other monsters, and others hid in tiny caves. But what irritated the guy most was the amount of time it took to kill them. However, Sora continued to walk forward and forward. He had only one goal: to get out of here. And for this, the guy literally walked over the heads of these bloodthirsty monsters, mercilessly killing each key carrier, continuing to move forward. Over all the battles, Sora became stronger. His body acquired a more muscular appearance, and his hair seemed to grow longer with each battle. Each type of monster was completely different. Some walked mercilessly on the ground, making terrible sounds, and some flew in the sky, spreading their large wings. Such a number of undead became a bit difficult for the guy, as if he was already going crazy from the monotony of his actions. Everything around hardly changed its appearance, and the guy's head began to boil from the same area. On the 42nd tier, he wondered what year it was, and quickly cut off his own question, since the concept of time was no longer important. There was only death and carnage left here, and in order to somehow understand the passage of time, Sora found a huge slab. On this slab, he began to scratch sticks as if counting down the days. Although, in essence, time and its course were not important. The monsters at this time were already waiting to attack him and were slowly walking towards him. Suddenly, while the guy was thinking about his stay here, someone very big stood behind him. It was a huge monster with a boar's head and a big belly, and as soon as he saw the young man, he immediately swung his hammer, and he struck towards the boy without even thinking about how strong his opponent was. Sora quickly dodged the blow and jumped back towards the beast, ripping open its belly. And then the guy dealt with the subsequent monsters. Having torn off the head of another undead, Sora caught his breath. The guy remembered how many monsters there were in the end. When he recovered, the first thing he did was return to the stove, and again he began to carve a new notch on it. Looking at the number of scratched sticks, Sora thought that it was time to find the key, and the question remained how many more levels he would have to go through to finally find the coveted key. Suddenly, the stone slab with the number of monsters collapsed right before the guy's eyes, leaving only stone ruins. Another monster of enormous size, similar to some kind of insect, appeared in front of Sora. This appearance really impressed the guy, and he even thought that he had finally found the key to move to the next level. Full of enthusiasm, the guy prepared to jump on the beast to make another kill. But the monster seemed strong, and it was worth releasing all your strength to defeat it. However, when Sora started fighting him, he realized that no matter how strong the monster was, it was all the same. After all, even monsters who thought they were strong died with one blow, and each fight seemed to become easier and easier. Having killed another beast, the guy began to realize one thing that was not very pleasant. As it turned out, for him any power lost its meaning. But he never found the key to the 42nd tier, which made the situation even more complicated. Sora stopped feeling anything during the murders, and with each death his mind seemed to break more and more. And eventually the guy couldn't take it anymore and started screaming for the key to appear. Laughing hysterically, he continued to scream, fight, and look for the treasured key, but all was in vain. In the 20th century, 20 towers suddenly appeared all over the world. All the people were then horrified by what was happening around them and decided to destroy the towers. Before humanity had time to deal with them, monsters began to emerge from there, practically destroying the human race. Most were killed and many victims remained. And that day became known as the Day of Judgment. The few survivors awakened and gained access to the mysterious system. And those who awakened were granted colossal power, and human society was rebuilt. And the awakened founded hunters' guilds, after which everyone began to live with everything differently, while Sora at this time went through tier after tier in search of the key. And so, once again running after the monster with the supposed key, Sora saw something unusual. The dog-like beast, who wanted to run away from the boy so badly, was chained in unusual chains that glowed with a bright light. As if human speech was heard above the beast itself, it was clearly heard as someone said that she had used an advanced teleportation scroll and that the teleportation needed to be interrupted. After these words, the monster, without realizing it, began to rise into the sky, striving towards an unknown source of light, which resembled an exit. Sora seemed to come to his senses, seeing a semblance of a way out of this chaos, having forgotten about the keys. All this time, it seemed to him that there was no way out, and this would go on forever. But now it became clear that there was every chance to get out of here. And gathering all his strength together, the guy jumped straight towards the glowing whirlwind and rushed upward. But as soon as he was almost close to the portal, a notification appeared, which said that the summoning from the abyss could not move more than 2 living creatures. The guy, who had been in this place for so long, couldn't afford to miss such a chance. And becoming embittered, Sora began to look for the one who was preventing him from getting through the portal. Raising his head up, the young man seemed to fly towards the large circle, ignoring the notifications and chains that were trying to hold him back. At the same time, not far from the city, the earth was in a quiet, gloomy state. The sky was plunged into darkness, and almost nothing remained of the beautiful nature of the earth. A girl with pink hair was running away from someone in panic. Feeling the danger, she ran very quickly through the grass, not paying attention to anything. Level 19. Yu Sonozaki wanted to get away from the chase without looking back. But suddenly, her foot caught on the root of an unknown plant, and the girl fell to the ground, losing control of the situation. Unable to stand up, Sonozaki began to realize that things were bad and there was little chance of escape left. The root that the girl tripped over belonged to Aika, a level 30 druid who could control plants. Next to her stood a man with a large sword, who, coming closer, began to demand the return of the teleportation scroll, saying that a level 60th scroll was not something that a level 19 beginner could possess. Choji Shido, realizing that the girl was not going to get up, threatened her to give the scroll, promising to kill her otherwise. Sonozaki looked at Shido in horror and began to scream that fighting between hunters was prohibited and the guy was definitely breaking the rules. Shosei Toshida, level 38, who was a barbarian with a large sword, treated the rules with disregard, believing them to be unnecessary. And thrusting his sword into the ground right in front of the girl's face, he declared that he was the one making the rules here. Without letting Sonozaki leave, he once again asked her nicely to give him the scroll, promising to spare her hands in that case. The girl, realizing that she had no choice, began to stall for time, holding the scroll behind her back, declaring that if she were in their place, she would not have driven herself into a corner. Aika, who was standing nearby, immediately realized that the girl wanted to use forced summoning and immediately ordered Sonozaki to be stopped so that she could not escape. Toshida immediately became furious at such impudence and was about to attack. Grabbing the sword tighter, he shouted for the fugitive to give up the scroll. But Sonozaki herself was not going to give up just like that, having already come up with an escape plan. The guy's sword stopped instantly when he saw the girl's actions. Realizing that she was opening a teleportation circle, Toshida began to panic, knowing that there was little time left. Sonozaki decided that if she was going to die now, she'd better take the others with her. Aika, standing behind Toshida, realized that no one would be able to control the advanced monster that was brought in this way, which meant that it would be the end for them all. Shouting that she had to be stopped, all three rushed into battle. Shouting for everyone to die, Sonozaki prepared to take all of her enemies with her. And opening the portal, a powerful lightning bolt struck from it, from which Sora's silhouette fell out. Eika and Toshida immediately felt the overwhelming force, realizing that things would be tough. Without noticing the guy, everyone's gaze turned to the powerful beam from which the monster was about to appear. A formidable beast descended to the ground, releasing all its power. The third level, Cerberus straightened up and looked around in search of living creatures. But when the beast came closer, all three saw a small dog and began to laugh that so much noise was made for the sake of such a small beast. Aika began to laugh at Sonozaki, who did not understand why such a weak monster came to her. But suddenly someone's hand pierced the animal, frightening the girl. It was Sora who cut the animal in half with one blow. The entire team that was chasing Sonozaki froze in horror, not understanding what kind of humanoid monster it was. Sonozaki fell to the ground in fear, afraid to even move. Sora, with scars all over his body, finally realized that he had made it to the human world. And from an excess of emotions, the guy screamed hysterically, wanting everyone to know that he finally got out of there. No one tried to move, afraid to make an unnecessary movement and disturb the unknown. The guy's laughter alone made everyone standing nearby tremble, and his strength put extreme pressure on everything around him. No one could understand who it was and why this man came here from another world. When Sora finally came to his senses and realized the situation, he looked at everyone around him. First of all, the guy approached Aika, frightening her with just one look. The young man's eyes radiated incredible rage, and through the hair that had fallen over his face, a certain smile was visible. Leaning towards the girl, the guy asked if they were on Earth. And having received a positive answer, Sora laughed even harder, happy that he had finally returned. Looking at the men, the guy at first didn't even understand why the people were dressed so strangely, thinking that they were some kind of cosplayers. Considering this to be impudence, Toshida was the first to point his sword at the stranger, declaring that the Tiger Roar Guild should not be underestimated. And with a quick movement, the man rushed towards the guy, but Sora quickly repelled the attack. And he looked at everyone around him again, but with crazier eyes. Toshida stepped back and only whispered that the guy was a monster and nothing else. From these words, the guy's anger began to increase and everything he saw seemed to double. And then it began to seem to him that the man who stood opposite him was the goblin he had killed on the tiers. And unable to control his anger, the boy rushed towards Toshido, grabbing him by the throat. Sora began to think that it was another monster, and so began to demand the man to show his number. But Toshida himself did not understand what was being discussed, and could barely say it. Looking at him again, Sora thought about his next steps, and yet the guy decided to let go of the one who dared to insult him. Toshida collapsed to the ground, still feeling the colossal strength of this man. The man was so scared that he even wet his pants and started crawling backwards, wanting to save his life. Sora began to realize that during his time in the abyss, his mind had become seriously shaken, and in order not to do anything else, the guy told the gang to get lost. The Tiger Roar Guild rushed in panic and ran with all their might away from danger. Sonozaki, continuing to stand and not move, managed to examine these terrible scars on the guy's body, feeling the powerful force emanating from him. The girl could not understand who he was, and it was unlikely that he was a monster summoned from the abyss by a scroll. Sora, after watching the fugitives, turned to the frightened girl and asked how many years had passed since the appearance of the rabies. Sonozaki stuttered a little and replied that exactly 5 years had passed. The guy still asked again if they were really on Earth, why everyone was dressed so strangely, and what scroll they were talking about. And then Sonozaki said that after the towers appeared 5 years ago, a third of the city fell, and the people developed a system. The girl also said that the city, C, was subjected to major invasions, and she managed to escape from there. Hearing the name of the city, Sora remembered that this was his hometown, where he lost his parents that day. In a panic, the guy began to interrogate the girl, trying to find out what state the city was in now, and, as it turned out, it was already practically destroyed. But strong people were sent there who should be able to kill the monsters. Remembering that day, Sora began to find out how to get to City C. Sonozaki only had time to point with her hand in which direction to go when the guy immediately disappeared, running in that direction. The girl did not expect that he would go there alone, knowing that the city was teeming with scary and powerful monsters. Seeing how mysterious this man was, the girl decided to immediately go to her sister and tell her what had happened. Meanwhile, the Tiger Roar Guild slowly walked towards the abandoned city, helping Toshida walk. All four were very frightened and silently tried to comprehend the horror they had to face. Suddenly, in the middle of an empty street, an unknown man dressed in a black cloak appeared in front of them. Looking at the four, the stranger said that he felt someone's presence, and coming closer to the guild, he said that he was giving them 2 seconds to tell where the guy was. All four looked questioningly at the mysterious stranger. Toshida yelled at the man in the cloak, asking him if he was kidding, not even thinking about answering his question. The stranger, after hearing the man's screams, said that time was up and quickly rushed towards everyone, killing Aika, Shido, and Toshida, sparing no one. Meanwhile, the Tiger Roar Guild headquarters was located nearby in one of the safe places. The young girl reported that contact with Mr. Toshida's group had been lost, and the location of Sonozaki and the scroll was unknown. The guy sitting in front of her, calmly holding a glass of red wine, declared that this was nonsense. One of the main guilds did not believe that the guys recommended by the girl did not defeat a level 19 summoner. Rich Mukai, level 118, who was a priest, saw that the signal from everyone stopped coming at the same time, which meant that they were killed in one blow, which was almost impossible. Having ordered to find out who did it, Mukai calmly let his assistant go. And finally, the guy told the girl to catch Sonozaki and let her tell everything. Approaching the window, Mukai thought, deciding to kill anyone who dared to raise a hand against his people. Suddenly, to his great surprise, Sora flew past his panoramic window, not even paying attention to him. Mukai smelled the disgusting smell of blood through the window and even winced, wondering who it was. But then the guy saw that the stranger was running towards the fallen zone. And for a second, he remembered an invasion of a completely different level, in which major forces undoubtedly intervened, and the tower, which had been asleep for 5 years, finally began to move. Lost in his memories, Mukai quickly ordered all search parties to be recalled. After all, there was a matter that required more urgent intervention. Meanwhile, Sora ran as fast as he could towards his city, wanting to find out all the details of the past 5 years. The fallen area of City C looked very abandoned and destroyed. Even the sky above this area began to darken, and some demonic birds were flying around making different sounds. During the 5 years that the guy spent in the Abyss, this place turned into hell. But in the Abyss, while Sora was there, he went through many trials. The guy remembered that as soon as he found himself on the first tier, his strength was too small. But now he had become incredibly strong, which gave him a great advantage in surviving in this world. The boy's feelings had become hardened after all those numerous murders, and it seemed that he himself had become a monster during these 5 years. But thoughts about his family forced him to move forward and look for a way out. The monsters he once feared now seemed like tiny flies to him. But now, remembering his mother, father, and brother, Sora only hoped that they were able to protect themselves and stay alive. City C used to be bustling with life, but now it was just a wasteland where there wasn't a single living soul. All the buildings are destroyed, as if after a strong earthquake, and yet there are no traces of the monsters killing anyone. It was as if no one had lived here since the evacuation was announced. Sora, having reached his house, carefully opened the door to the apartment where he lived. But over time, the door simply broke. Looking inside, all that was visible was an empty apartment, shabby with time. The guy knew he wouldn't meet anyone, but he still came here. Lost in his memories, Sora looked at the destroyed apartment, into which the wind blew through the broken window. Looking around, he noticed a piece of paper lying on the dining table. Taking it, the guy saw a letter in which the following was written. "Dear Sora, everyone says you died, but your mother and I refuse to believe it. We took your things and laid them out in your room as they were before. We believe that you will return." After reading this, the boy began to cry, realizing how his parents risked their lives to come here for him. The letter said that his mother hung his favorite clothes from small to large sizes in his closet, so that the boy could always wear something new whenever he came home. The parents also made sure that their son found them and therefore left a map of the road to shelter number 6 in the dresser and wrote that as soon as Sora read this letter, he would immediately find his parents. And after reading his father's words in the letter, which said that he and his mother were always waiting for him, the boy took the family photo attached to the letter, where all 4 were captured in one shot. Putting the photo to his chest, the guy began to cry even harder, hoping that they were all still alive and that he would be able to find them. Dressed in his favorite clothes, Sora picked up his knife and looked at himself through his reflection, seeing how he had changed. Thinking about how strong he was now, the guy decided to first tidy himself up and casually, using a knife, he cut off some of the hair that had grown during the time in the Abyss. Sora believed that he would be able to get back the lost days, no matter what it took. And the first thing he needed to do was find shelter number 6. The young man decided to move east as shown on the map, straight to shelter number 6. But the road passed through ruins strewn with debris and blood. Sora then decided to make his own way to get there faster. And having thought everything through, the guy ran to the shelter, running and jumping over the ruins of the debris. But on his way, he suddenly encountered a monster that looked like an eagle with large feathered wings. This was not a big difficulty for Sora, and the boy dealt with the animal quite quickly. So on his way, he met many monsters, which the young man immediately killed for his goal. One of the guards of the Fallen Zone, standing on top of the building, at that moment heard strange sounds, not even guessing who was making these sounds, but the second guard only joked that he was just imagining it. But suddenly, unexpectedly, someone flew very quickly right over their heads without even letting them understand who it was. Two young guys turned their gaze towards the flying thing, trying to see what it was. Later, another guy came up to their building with a phone in his hands, shouting that he had managed to film the object. And to everyone's surprise, after watching the video, it turned out that it was a person, or rather, Sora, flying at high speed towards his parents. Flying past tall buildings, the guy noticed a screaming girl who asked him not to approach her. Three guys slowly walked step by step towards the innocent girl and threw her compliments, saying how pretty she was and how long it had been since they had seen a woman. One of the guys standing in front even licked his lips, looking slyly at the victim. He even promised to take care of her as soon as they had some fun. And leaning towards the girl face to face, the guy touched her head, frightening her even more. It became clear that it was Eiji Kagawa who, with an evil laugh, promised to be gentle. But everyone understood that this was a lie. Saliva flowed from the impudent man's mouth as he slowly ran his hand over the girl's chest. Sora noticed this and immediately dropped to the ground, noticing that some things don't change, and the non-entities remained as they were. Hearing someone's voice, the guys in armor threatened the young man that if he interfered, they would kill him immediately. And realizing that he wouldn't just leave him alone, the leader ordered the boy to be captured while he was having fun with the girl. The two guys grabbed their swords and quickly ran towards Sora, shouting death wishes. Sora didn't even move from his spot, not at all afraid for his life, knowing that it would be very easy to deal with them. As soon as one of the attackers was very close, the guy gave him a very strong slap in the face, quickly stunning the enemy. The guy who received the blow immediately fell to the ground. At that very moment, a sword appeared next to Sora's face. But the guy quickly interrupted the attack by grabbing the other's hand and starting to squeeze it with all his strength. And after hitting him in the face, the second attacker also fell to the ground lifeless. At this time, Eiji came up and had no choice but to intervene, and while he went to sort things out, the girl they wanted to attack managed to run away. Sora, seeing a familiar face, quietly said the guy's name, remembering how he pushed him out of the truck. And raising his head, the guy asked if he had really forgotten the face of the one he killed. Eiji began to tremble in horror, not believing that the guy was alive. The guy thought that this couldn't be, and out of fear, he even fell to the ground and started crawling backwards. Sora, having the opportunity to deal with the impudent man, menacingly appeared before the frightened Eiji. And suddenly standing up on his feet, the guy started shouting for them not to come near him, still not believing that the boy had been alive all this time. A sly smile appeared on Sora's face, and the guy suddenly reached out his hand to Eiji's face. Grabbing him by the throat, the guy began to squeeze his neck, causing Kagawa to choke without the ability to respond. And stating that it was his fault that he had to fight his way out of hell, Sora pushed the guy back while still holding him by the throat. There was fear on Eiji's face, and the boy understood that it seemed like he wouldn't leave here alive. Sora didn't even pay attention to the impudent guy's fear and shouted that now it was his time to go to hell. He grabbed Kagawa even harder, digging his nails into his neck, making small wounds. Having promised to take away every bit of his self-respect, the boy could no longer contain his anger, blaming only Eiji for what had happened, because he had ruined his life and separated him from his parents. The guy's anger was so great that voices began to speak in his head, telling him to kill the enemy, offering to subordinate everything to his will. In the past, all Eiji did was torment the boy. Every day, Sora experienced feelings of pain, humiliation, and helplessness. But today, he will finally be able to get it all back. And suddenly, a memory popped into his head of how Eiji had once strangled a guy, declaring that destroying a guy's self-respect was damn nice. These words made the guy stop abruptly. Letting go of his hand, Kagawa quickly fell to the ground, still gasping for breath. Trying to clear his throat, Eiji was afraid to even look up at the guy who simply froze in place. Sora realized that he couldn't become as cruel. But remembering what Eiji had done with the girl a couple of minutes ago, the guy still couldn't allow such worthless people to continue breathing. Thinking about this made the guy feel emotional, but not forget about revenge. Coming closer, Sora called over to Eiji, who was still coming to his senses. The guy said that since he tried to kill him and couldn't, then he would spare his life, but Sora still added that he wouldn't let him just leave. Looking at how Kagawa began to get nervous, the guy began to remember those 2 years of hell at school, how Eiji terrorized not only him, but the other weak students as well, and the way he threw him out of the back of the truck, trying to kill him. For all those horrible things, Eiji needs to get hit 4 times and then it will be all worth it. Kagawa, realizing that he could die even after the first blow, began to beg Sora not to do it, apologizing for everything he had done. Taking hold of the edge of the sweater, Sora slyly began to calm the guy down, telling him not to worry. Eiji seemed to start remembering all the moments of his life as he saw the boy swinging his arm to strike. And before he could think, Kagawa received his first blow to the face, which immediately stunned and confused him. The second blow seemed even stronger, and it seemed that the guy would not be able to withstand a third. With 2 blows to the face, Eiji began to bleed, which began to spread across the ground, frightening his 2 comrades. Without giving him a break, Sora struck a 3rd blow, remembering all the pain that this bastard had caused him. The boy decided to save the 4th blow, and after laughing a little, he ordered Eiji to stand up. Kagawa, kneeling down, barely alive and covered in bruises, abrasions, and blood, whispered for the guy to just kill him. And right after his words, Sora's foot flew into his face. This blow was the last one for him, and the guy decided not to hold back, and with all his might crushed Eiji's face into the ground. Eiji fell down dead, blood pouring from his eyes and showing no signs of life. He had no limbs or sight left, which greatly satisfied the young man. Seeing that Eiji was barely breathing, the boy told his friends to take him to the hospital. And before leaving, Sora shouted for them not to appear in his sight again. Leaving Eiji's body behind, the boy hurried further towards the shelter. Having dealt with the cleanup, it was time to move on to meet the parents. Believing that he would finally be home, Sora sped up as fast as he could to get there. It was already approaching evening. The sun was gradually sinking below the horizon, and no one knew what might happen at night. From the fallen zone, the guy found himself in the city's security zone. At the border, 3 soldiers in uniform stood and discussed their willingness to remain on guard duty on the wall. Everyone laughed, saying how good it was that they didn't have to fight monsters here, but it wasn't worth losing your head if you had to fight. The military's conversation was interrupted by First Lieutenant Tanji Kagura, level 31, reminding the soldiers not to let their guard down, because no one knows when monsters might come. But Private Shoki Matsura, a 22nd level warrior, said that the monsters would hardly get here, and, to everyone's surprise, immediately after the words, a monster suddenly attacked them, killing several soldiers in a matter of seconds. It was a child of a level 45 kraken, a shell-like monster that pierced its victims with its claws and stared at the rest with one of its large eyes. The military immediately opened fire, essentially trying to contain him at the border to prevent him from entering the safe zone. The monster itself was very strong, but the shots only made it even more angry, especially since the bullets did almost no damage to it. The soldiers realized that the monster was too high level and their weapons were simply powerless in this battle. The merciless beast meanwhile continued its advance, and it seemed that it would be able to cross the border. Kagura, commanding his soldiers, ordered everyone to disperse and take their positions. The kraken, with its sharp claws, cut the almost unarmed soldiers in 2 one after another. It was decided to run to the side to confuse the monster. One of the soldiers, holding explosives in his hand, began to attract attention to himself. And while he ran towards the monster to plant the bomb, the others continued to shoot, protecting the soldier. The kraken began to defend itself with its tentacles and shell, covering its large eye from bullets. The soldier with the bomb was already next to him, and it seemed that they had a chance of winning. And suddenly the monster began to behave strangely, raising its eyes upward, stopping killing the soldiers. The kraken seemed to be afraid of something, and the soldiers, not understanding what was going on, stopped firing. Covering its eyes with its tentacles, the beast began to back away, continuing to look up. The soldiers froze in place, not understanding what was happening. Everyone noticed that something had frightened the monster, but what could have frightened such a strong beast? The kraken began to gradually close its eye, as if it sensed the approach of danger. His pupil narrowed and his tentacles began to move in a chaotic manner, continuing to confuse the others. No one knew what he was afraid of, and so they had to be even more on guard. While everyone stood still, one of the soldiers thought this was a good opportunity to plant a bomb, and, grabbing the box, he rushed towards the monster. Having thrown an explosive device under the paws of the kraken and wished for death, everyone began to wait for what would happen. The soldiers barely had time to escape because the bomb exploded as soon as it hit the ground, stunning everyone around. Standing on the ground, the soldiers began to wait for the smoke to clear to see whether they had killed him or not. But the Kraken remained alive without a single scratch and only became even more angry, fixing its large eye on the soldiers. No one could believe that such a powerful bomb could not tear the animal apart. The Kraken's shell turned out to be so strong that it was not affected by fire or explosion, which made the situation even more serious. One of the soldiers was so scared that he couldn't even move and just looked at one of the beast's claws approaching him. But suddenly, unexpectedly for everyone, Sora appeared, who saved the military man at the last moment. The guy began to brutally kill the monster, tearing off its limbs, and the beast began to gradually bleed out. The lieutenant, seeing how he mercilessly killed such a strong opponent, finally realized that it was this guy that the Kraken was afraid of. It wasn't long before the monster died, and Sora calmly walked forward, looking around. Kagura couldn't believe that this guy was able to survive the explosion and still kill the monster. People with such S-rank destructive power, and the man himself had never seen anyone like that. Continuing to look at him, the man decided at all costs to find out who he was, using his ability to look and see information about the target. And the closer the user is in level, the more accurate the information seen. The lieutenant, seeing such power for the first time, could not believe what was happening, but what he saw next made him freeze in place. A system warning appeared before his eyes, telling him to show his respect to this guy. Kagura only saw this warning, but he never received any information, as if it simply did not exist. From shock and helplessness, the man began to lose consciousness, but the military quickly caught the lieutenant. Sora calmly looked at the military while continuing to stand next to the monster's corpse. Seeing a soldier nearby, the guy stopped him, saying that he wanted to ask a question. Coming closer, the young man asked how far away the sixth shelter was, slightly confusing the military man. But he still answered that the shelter the guy was looking for was 5 to 10 kilometers to the north. But before getting there, the guy needed to go to Zone X. This was the first time Sora had heard about this zone, so he immediately recognized it. As it turns out, this zone is where the advance of monsters is held back. They are lured there to minimize damage from battles, and there were also many monster hunters there. Turning his head, Sora heard the soldiers marvel at the rare items that dropped after killing the monster. It became clear that when you win, in the real world, things drop from each kill just like in the game. Turning again to the soldier, the boy asked how strong this monster was for them. Level 45 was a pretty tough opponent for the military, and if it weren't for the guy, it seemed like they would die. Sora was a little surprised that even this was causing people difficulty. Having learned that there were no more than 100 monsters in that zone, the young man headed there, thinking that he would soon find himself in a shelter. But as soon as he turned around to leave, the soldier who had answered all his questions began to behave strangely, as if he wanted to say something. And having collected his thoughts, the man stopped the guy, not even knowing his name. Sora stopped, deciding to listen to the stranger. The soldier, stuttering a little, said that perhaps his request would sound strange, and bowing, expressing respect, he asked the guy to go to Zone X. The soldier explained that a strong hunter like Sora would save many people, of whom there were already few. The guy thought for a second and asked if this was the shortest route to shelter number 6, if he went through this zone. And having received a positive answer, the guy agreed to the man's request without hesitation. And before leaving, Sora promised to walk around the zone and kill all the monsters that were unfortunate enough to get in his way. Nearby in this area, there was a military camp on the front line, filled with various equipment and a warehouse with ammunition. In one of the tents, Kagura lay unconscious and was almost coming to his senses. One of the soldiers stayed next to the lieutenant the whole time, making sure that nothing happened to him. And when the man opened his eyes, he was very happy. Sitting down on the bed, the man immediately realized that he had been out for about 10 minutes. And to cheer up the lieutenant, the guy said that the monster dropped recovery items and it was they that helped the man quickly wake up. But all this was not so important for the man. He was only concerned about the guy who saved them from certain death. From the soldier, he learned that Sora had gone north. Realizing that it seemed that it would not be possible to talk to him, the man bowed his head and sighed languidly. But then he straightened up abruptly, realizing the words about the north. The soldier clarified that the guy headed towards the 6th shelter, which was very strange for everyone. Kagura even asked again, not believing that the stranger really went through Zone X, which was full of monsters. It was clear that the young man didn't care about such a large number of undead, because he didn't even hesitate for a second before heading there. Sighing, the lieutenant ordered an immediate call to the main command center. Such an order was clearly rare because the soldier stood in a stupor, even upon hearing these words. While the soldier ran to carry out the order, the man continued to sit on the couch, thinking that there was not much time left until the appointed time. And looking at the clock, it became clear that there were about 10 minutes left, which meant the man had to make it in time. A couple of minutes later, a soldier ran in, saying that he had sent a message on the emergency radio. And coming closer, I decided to ask why they needed to contact the command center. As it turned out, this mission was different from the previous ones, and the information was highly classified, so no one knew anything. Taking the electronic device, the man turned on the map, explaining that Zone X, which served as the base for the mission, was no longer the place where they were holding the monsters. Now it is a bombing zone where they dropped bombs at designated times. And the general staff was watching all this all the time, trying to keep this information secret. Meanwhile, the headquarters received an emergency call from Zone B-22. The chief commander Renji Kumagaya, a level 58 flame mage, immediately ordered him to be connected to the call, and the dispatcher quickly began to set up the connection. After a couple of seconds, the call was set up. Kagura appeared from the screen, stating his communication code BW3422, stating that he had new information. Having received permission, the man said that the mysterious hunter had gone to the bombing zone, and he knew nothing about this mission. Renji, sitting in a chair and taking a deep breath, declared that this was only the lieutenant's own mistake. But the man had something else very important to tell, and so he didn't even pay attention to it. Kagura felt it was necessary to urgently inform the boy about the upcoming bombing. And at first, the commander did not even take these words seriously. Realizing that there was not much time left, Kagura began to shout that this guy was very strong and everything must be done to prevent him from dying. The lieutenant's cry forced the commander to listen to the man. Renji, still sitting in his chair, asked what level this hunter was exactly, since the bombing had to be postponed for his sake. But Kagura didn't know the answer to this question, since the system didn't show anything. And in response, the commander just laughed. Renji, having no respect for his subordinates, asked why the lieutenant wanted him to urgently contact the guy. At this point, the man's assistant, who was standing next to him, intervened, stating that he would most likely be dead by the time the message arrived. Renji began to laugh, saying that the man lacked brains, but he had a talent for humor. And looking at the blonde sitting next to him, as if addressing her, the man said that it looked like the soldiers weren't trained well enough to be left alone. The commander was not in a position to interfere in the affairs of his subordinates outside his jurisdiction. And leaning towards the girl, he reminded her that if he reported to his superiors that someone was hindering the progress of the mission, that person would immediately be brought to justice. Western Commander Mie Tonosaki, a level 73 golem tamer to whom the man's words were addressed, wondered if Renji was seriously going to set up his man when they needed to deal with the enemy. Mentally calling him an idiot, the girl did not allow herself to answer. And yet, Kagura, who was trained so carefully, tries to save the stranger, even if it means canceling the mission. Feeling that something was wrong, the girl asked how strong this man was since they didn't even know his level. Kagura remained silent, not even knowing how to answer, realizing that he knew absolutely nothing about the guy. With tensions rising and few answers available, Mie decided to take a different approach. Standing up from her chair and crossing her arms, the girl turned to the lieutenant, realizing that he hardly had any intention of interfering with the plan. But if the man's reason was not convincing enough, the girl promised to personally hand him over to a military tribunal. These words made the man shudder, realizing that he needed to come up with the right words to save the guy. After scolding the lieutenant, Mie asked Renji if he was satisfied with this measure of restraint for his subordinates. The commander could not answer anything, because the girl did everything right. And sitting down in the chair, the man asked to name the reason why they should save this hunter. Kagura stated very clearly that the man killed a level 45 Kraken hatchling in one blow. Everyone suddenly fell silent at headquarters. It was clear that the guy was definitely a hunter with a rank higher than A, and Mie asked if he was an S-rank military man. Although this was impossible, since everyone with such a rank was on missions, and there were no confirmation signals coming from B-22. Mie, understanding the urgency of the situation, asked why Kagura didn't know the level of this person, even though he was able to see it. The man sighed and replied that he was unable to see the level this time. This news left everyone around stunned. But the lieutenant also added that when using the ability on the guy, he lost consciousness due to an overabundance of information. This meant that the guy was at least level 100. No one could say anything about all this news. The situation was becoming even more tense, and there was not much time left. Such strength was truly rare, and no one had ever seen such a person, which meant he could be of great help to the military. But for Renji, this was no reason to stop the mission they had been preparing for a very long time. Eastern Commander Nobuo Yuasa agreed with the man, saying that they could not stop their war plans for such a vague reason. This mission would involve thousands of troops from 4 different forces, and that would be enough to completely encircle the bombing and security zones. Yuasa also noted that the original plan was for the garrison soldiers to kill the remaining monsters after the bombing. But if you make an emergency alert, the monsters will react to the sound. And they will run to one place, and if this happens, the territory will fall instantly. And thousands of soldiers would die. And the man saw no point at all in saving one in exchange for thousands. It's too risky even for an S-rank hunter. Kagura could not allow such a strong man to be lost because he could be of great help to the military. And the only hope left was for me, who fell silent and thought about something. Having collected her thoughts, the girl finally made a decision. And she said she was rejecting the request, saying they couldn't spend that much effort and people to save just one. Kagura on the other side of the screen couldn't even respond. The connection was terminated immediately after the girl's answer, so the lieutenant didn't even have time to say anything. Everyone in the tent who heard the conversation immediately drooped. For the man himself, it was a huge failure. One of the soldiers tried to calm him down by saying that he had done all he could. But Kagura became upset as if he was trying even harder to contain his emotions. The final result was very important to him. But now, it was as if everything was just like that. While the lieutenant stood there thinking that he had lost such a strong man, one of the soldiers looked at the keys on his belt. The guy definitely has some kind of plan that could fix everything. Carefully reaching out his hand, the guy almost imperceptibly stole the lieutenant's keys. Kagura heard the sound of keys a few seconds later and quickly looked at his belt, not seeing them on him. Looking back, the man saw the boy running towards his car, ignoring the lieutenant's order for him to stop. The guy, getting into the car, knew that there was still time and it was worth trying to save that man. Kagura began shouting at Private Matsura to come back, otherwise he would be immediately court-martialed, and not only he could suffer. But the private didn't hear anyone and drove at full speed to save the person who was important to the lieutenant. The soldier who approached the man immediately asked if he needed to go after the fugitive. But Kagura adjusted his cap and declared that this should not be done. The man knew that the private had made this decision himself, and it would be up to him. Matsura, meanwhile, pressed the gas pedal as hard as he could in the hope that he would make it in time. The guy was driving so fast that he couldn't even think about anything. The private just looked at the road and believed that he could find the man. But he didn't yet know that the boy he was trying to save would become the hope of all humanity. And Sora himself had no idea that he could save the whole world from terrible destruction. At that moment, Matsura lost track of the guy, and there wasn't much time left. The guy began to urgently think where this man could go, remembering everything he said. And then he remembered how Sora asked about shelter and the shortest route. During this time, the guy could not have gone that far, which meant that he could move faster than the car. Driving further, Zone X began, where bombing was about to begin. Thinking about what to do, the private thought about a loudspeaker, and then the guy would be able to hear him. But then this would also give a tip to the monsters, which was very dangerous not only for Matsura, but also for the others. Looking at his watch, the guy realized that there were about 3 minutes left before the start of the task. He no longer cared if he died, and the private, without a second thought, turned on the radio for the loudspeaker. Taking a deep breath, the guy prepared himself for a very dangerous mission to save the strongest man. Slowing down a bit and passing by the ruins, Matsura thought for a moment about how best to say it so that the guy would definitely leave. He even caught himself thinking that he was a disgrace to the army for doing such absurd things. But it was too late to retreat and everything was at stake. Shouting into the radio, the private said that the soldier speaking was the one Sora had saved that time. And later, even louder, the guy declared that this area was about to be bombed, and that person needed to evacuate immediately. Sora was nearby at the time and heard these words almost immediately. Hearing about the bombing, the guy understood why there were no hunters here. And looking into the distance, Sora knew that the monsters were not at all scary to him. But it was unknown whether he could survive the heat from the explosion, and it was better to avoid senseless risks. Still hearing the loudspeaker, Sora noticed that the soldier had put his entire life on the line just to warn him, which was very humane of him, and so the boy couldn't let him die. Matsura at this time got out of the car looking into the distance in the hope that the man heard his message. There were literally just a couple of seconds left before the bomb fell, and the monsters didn't even suspect it at that time. But they heard Matsura's words and quickly headed towards the source of the sound. The private got back into the car and immediately noticed the huge monster, realizing that he had indeed attracted the attention of the monsters. So, quickly starting the car engine, the guy decided to get away from here as quickly as possible. There are about 10 seconds left before the bombing begins. But the private never saw that man, and having decided to abandon the idea of leaving here, the guy, on the contrary, went inside the zone. But suddenly someone knocked on the car window. Turning his head, Matsura saw a completely calm guy. Sora's first question was what he meant when he said something about bombing the zone. Casually glancing at his watch, the private couldn't even answer the guy, realizing that there was 1 second left before the explosion. As soon as the clock showed exactly 5 o'clock, the sounds of airplanes began to be heard from afar. The fast fighters began dropping bombs one after another, and the first explosion happened right next to the guys. Matsura began to panic, afraid to get out of the car while Sora himself stood calmly in place. It seemed as if a bomb was about to fall on them. Another explosion was heard almost nearby, burning all the ruins of the buildings to the ground. One of the building's fragments flew straight at the guy with the private, but Sora easily stopped the stone flying at him with his hand. At this time, the headquarters was in full swing observing the special operation. A couple of minutes after it began, the dispatcher announced that the bombing was complete. Renji immediately ordered the drones to be used to find out how many monsters they had killed and where the survivors were heading. The drones showed no signs of life, and as it turned out, the monsters were still in the bombed area, and those in the center of the bombing are completely unharmed. Renji stood up from his chair and screamed how this could even be possible. Me, remaining calm, immediately asked what the drones were showing. But the girl sitting at the monitor couldn't even move from what she saw. Everyone in the room froze in anticipation. All the monsters seemed to have formed dome-shaped shields, and so the bombs didn't even touch them. But what was strange was the unknown man with white hair and a black cloak among them. The man stood clearly among the merciless monsters and calmly headed with them to another zone. The drones were almost immediately attacked by monsters and broken, and surveillance ceased. Switching to another drone, the last thing that was visible was a huge monster with red eyes who just as quickly broke the device. And so all the devices broke down one after another. The monsters broke, bit, and destroyed every drone that flew near them. Eventually, the headquarters lost all contact with the surveillance cameras. Me remembered that they had already been told that this wave was different from the others, but no one understood what it was just now. And suddenly, the girl realized that all this time they knew about reconnaissance with drones. Yuasa looked around at everyone in horror. And realizing the full danger of the situation, the man shouted, ordering the evacuation of all soldiers from the garrison. Right behind him, Mi gave the order for a full retreat and to hold the walls. But the girl sitting at the monitor said in horror that the monsters were not heading towards the walls. At this news, everyone again fell silent in horror. Mi, without waiting for an answer, screamed, asking where they were going then. The girl pointed to the map on the monitor and said that the monsters were heading towards Zone B22. And then Mi remembered that this is where the mysterious hunter was heading, and why then would the evil spirits go to this guy? There was little time for guesswork, and the girl simply gave the order to send all the remaining drones to this zone and quickly find out what stopped the advance of the monsters. Meanwhile, the zone was almost empty. There was not a single sound, and no one was alive. Only the private and the guy stood still when they heard the bombs stop falling. After getting out of the car, Matsura looked at his hands, realizing that he was still alive. And overjoyed, the guy began to shout throughout the street that he had survived. But Sora stopped him, saying that it was too early to celebrate, because if they were alive, then the monsters were too, and they were definitely heading here. Suddenly, the guy quickly turned his head back, noticing something flying towards him. And shouting for the private to lie down, he dodged at the last moment. It was a fallen, broken drone, which the guys dodged in time. Matsura noticed that it was the monster that broke the drone, which usually never happened. But Sora said that it was too early to be surprised. It was necessary to understand how far the monsters were from them.